Chapter 12. The absence of the usually unfailing sun wind made the next Saturday oppressively hot. The cicadas had begun. They racketed in a ragged chorus, never quite finding a common beat, rasping one's nerves, but finally so familiar that when one day they stopped in a rare shower of rain, the silence was like an explosion. They completely changed the character of the pine forest. Now it was live and multitudinous, an audible, invisible hive of energy, with all its pure solitude gone, for besides the chichikia, the air throbbed, whined, hummed with carmine-winged grasshoppers, locusts, huge hornets, bees, midges, bots, and 10,000 other anonymous insects. In some places there were nagging clouds of black flies, so that I climbed through the trees like a new Orestes, cursing and slapping. I came to the ridge again. The sea was a pearly turquoise, the far mountains ash blue in the windless heat. I could see the shimmering green crown of pine trees around Vorani. It was about noon when I came through the trees out onto the shingle of the beach with the chapel. It was deserted. I searched among the rocks, but there was nothing, and I didn't feel watched. I had a swim, then lunch, black bread and okra and fried squid. A long way south, a plump cake thudded past, towing a line of 6 little lamp boats, like a mallard with ducklings. Its bow wave made a dark miraging ripple on the creamy blue surface of the sea, and that was all that remained of civilization when the boats had disappeared behind the western headland. There was the infinitesimal lap of the transparent blue water on the stones, the waiting trees, the myriad dynamos of the insects, and the enormous landscape of silence. I dozed under the thin shade of a pine in the agelessness, the absolute dissociation of wild Greece. The sun moved, came on me, and made me erotic. I thought of Allison, of sex things we had done together. I wished she was beside me, naked. We would have made love against the pine needles, then swum, then made love again. I was filled with a dry sadness, a mixture of remembering and knowing, remembering what was and what might have been, and knowing it was all past. At the same time, knowing or beginning to know that other things were happily past, at least some of my illusions about myself, and then the syphilis, for there were no signs that it was going to come back. I felt physically very well. What was going to become of my life I didn't know, but lying there that day by the sea, it didn't seem to matter much. To be was enough. I felt myself in suspension, waiting without fear for some impulse to drive me on. I turned on my stomach and made love to the memory of Allison like an animal, without guilt or shame, a mere machine for sensation spread-eagled on the earth. Then I ran across the burning stones into the sea. I climbed the path by the wire and the undergrowth, passed beside the peeling gate, stood once more before the mysterious sign. The grassy track ran level, curved and dipped a little, emerged from the trees. The house, dazzlingly white where the afternoon sun touched it, stood with its shadowed back to me. It had been built on the seaward side of a small cottage that had evidently existed before it. It was square with a flat roof and a colonnade of slender arches running round the south and east sides. Above the colonnade was a terrace. I could see the open French windows of a first-floor room giving access to it. To the east and back of the house there were lines of sword plants and small clumps of bushes with vivid scarlet and yellow flowers. In front, southwards and seawards, there was a stretch of gravel, and then the ground fell away abruptly down to the sea. At both corners of the gravel stood palm trees in neat whitewashed rings of stones. The pines had been thinned to clear the view. The house abashed me. It was too reminiscent of the Côte d'Azur, too un-Greek. It stood, white and opulent, like Swiss snow, had made me feel sticky-palmed and uncouth. I walked up a small flight of steps to the red-tiled side colonnade. There was a closed door with an iron knocker cast in the shape of a dolphin. The windows beside it were heavily shuttered. I knocked on the door. The knocks barked sharply over stone floors. But no one came. The house and I waited silently in a sea of insect sound. I went along the colonnade to the corner of the southern front of the house. There the colonnade was wider and the slender arches more open, standing in the deep shade. I looked out over the treetops and the sea to the languishing ash-lilac mountains, a déjà vu feeling of having stood in the same place. Before that particular proportion of the arches, that particular contrast of shade and burning landscape outside, I couldn't say. There were 2 old cane chairs in the middle of the colonnade, and a table covered with a blue and white folk-weave cloth, on which there were 2 cups and saucers and 2 large plates covered in muslin. By the wall stood a rattan couch with cushions, and hanging from a bracket by the open French windows was a small, brightly polished bell with a faded maroon tassel hanging from the clapper. I noticed the 2-ness of the tea-table, and stood by the corner, embarrassed, aware of a trite English desire to sneak away. Then, without warning, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was Conchis.